turn off the transcription because Kiwi accents never go well. Right. I did send you meeting 2, didn't I? Yes. Yeah. I see, Di, you're struggling with the same problem I have as the sun comes in just completely on the screens. So what I will do is I'll share my screen, and that way I don't have to faff around when I do the recording to figure out what screens I should be showing. So we still will do an icebreaker because why not? There's only 4 of us. Just name, pronoun, where we're from, and the question this week, is that what I did? No, it wasn't. Should be double or single decker bus. Should bus windows open. That was because I did double or single decker last time. Let me just change that. So it's going to be should bus windows open. And then I'm just going to go through just previously on, because I think there's a couple. Rebecca, I haven't seen you for a while. I just wanted to make sure that you were up with everything. We'll just quickly run through what we've defined so far of a bus stop, which I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's actually coming to that consensus agreement as to what a bus stop is. And then I'm going to just tackle visualizing data because there were some things we found out from the last meeting. So I'm really interested in how you are both seeing them in your areas and what we could bring into this visualization that might be really interesting. So icebreaker. Hi, I'm Dr. J, use they as a pronoun. I'm the hand wavy person from DFT who just comes and eats your scones, because Di makes amazing scones if you ever get a chance. And should bus windows open? Yes, if there's no aircon. And I say this because some of the early Boris buses didn't have good aircon, and they didn't have openable windows, and they became portable double-decker sorters. So I am just going to I'll go to Di, and then Rebecca, and then Hannah, I think is the easiest way. So Di, you're up.
I'm Di, I'm from Connect Valley. I'm a she, and what's aircon on buses? This is the north. But yes, windows should open.
And Rebecca.
Rebecca Rowe. I always say call me anything you like as long as it's polite. I'm normally a Becky as well. I'm from where am I from? South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, bit of a gobful. I'm the service information manager there. And should bus windows open? Yeah, definitely. Like Di said, yeah, there's no such thing as air conditioning in the north. that might just be a TFL thing. It hasn't got that far yet. Perhaps with a bit more levelling up.
Fantastic. And Hannah.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. Sorry, the camera is off. I've got a bit of issues with Teams this morning, but lovely to see everyone. I'm a she, her, and I am one of the product owners on NaPTAN. So I work alongside Jay, the team, and Haraj, who couldn't be here today. And yes, I echo everything that everyone said. Bus windows should open. I live in North London and it gets very crowded on buses. So if the windows don't open, that would be a bit of a nightmare during summer.
Fantastic. So just a very quick plan for today. I've gone through it, but we'll just do the housekeeping. We'll go through the previously on, just making sure that there's no questions that arise from the stuff that we've popped up in other meetings. I'll then talk through what happened last time. I'll show you some of those screens and then talk about what I think how we could build on that today, and then some the standard feedback corner. Because yous are here, you both know this. You can see us on YouTube, you can follow us on Eventbrite, and you can sign up for the newsletter. And we send the newsletter out So we use it to do like a monthly update on what's going on with NaPTAN. We then also, if there's any outages or anything like that, we let people know as soon as possible via the newsletter, so that everyone's up to date. And we'll often send one out to say, oops, there's something going on, which I think we had when we originally did the migration. We've actually set it 100% uptime for the last 3 or 4 months now, which is really, really good. And if there is anything, we will send stuff out straight away and just let you know that if there's something going on. Previously on NaPTAN, we have this archive service, this managed removal service, which is about getting old stops, the stops that no longer physically exist in the world, but still have a data version stuck in NaPTAN, because we couldn't really get rid of them for now. The when varies, I think, depending on people. Some people, I don't think they've been able to remove stuff since the mid-2000s. For some people, it was a little bit later. But effectively, since about 2013 to 2015, there hasn't been the ability to remove stops at all. It broke during one of the migrations. So we are currently, we've come up with a service for taking stops out. We built an alpha technical solution and did some user research. So thank you, Di, who came along, and I think we had Kyle, I think it was, from South Yorkshire, came along. And because of that, we're now able to move on into private beta relatively quickly. So we're currently just figuring out the 2 things that we needed to figure out. One was smoothing out the journey so that it's got a confirmation step, and it did a little bit of the things that people needed. And the other one is how to do the bulk removals to set you up as part of your migration. So we're building a migration and rollout plan. And I think Hannah and Haraj are going to kind of manage that big rollout plan and go to market for that. Street versus schema, we're still, this will be an ongoing, the long ongoing saga of street versus schema. It's very much around how we represent what's in the street in the best way, what changes we might need to make to the schema to allow for some of the newer things, like there are marked hail and rides in some areas that we need to allow for them to exist. We also want to look at how we put in things like not so much taxi stands, but how we put in the bike racks, the lockable bike racks, the shared bike racks, and also the electric scooters and electric bike, where there's a little corral spot on the street, how we would look at putting those in so we allow kind of active and micro-mobility to be represented. But there's also basic things like names. Precisely and accurately, we know eastings, northings, everyone does them. We are converting using the Ordnance Survey version to lat long, and we're asking, so if we ever have to do a conversion, we're asking that everyone use that particular method, and then everyone's going to be consistent in the methodology being used, and that's going to get us a whole step closer, because what we uncovered was different allies were doing things slightly differently in the software and everything, and we're looking at working with Ordnance Survey to see if there's a little tool that we can start rolling out a little bit better as well. Coaches, we discovered what a coach was, because it's not a bus. And interestingly, the 900 coach stops, which were the national coach stops, which was a whole ATCO code that was managed by DFT, was not being used by anybody as no longer valid data. So we've pulled it out of the system. We are no longer publishing it, but we have it kind of sat around if anyone ever needs it. One of the things we will do is we will actually withdraw this properly using the managed removal service from the NaPTAN data set. We then tried to understand how we use ATCO codes and NaPTAN codes and what they meant and how people thought about them. And I lost my mind in real time. I still look back watching myself in that video and just see me attempting not to go, what you mean, nobody does this the same way twice. And that's essentially what I've uncovered. Di's like, yes, of course I knew this. And we also did a data retention policy that I went through in the last in the last set of meetings. That's been presented in those 2 public meetings to Travel Line, and we're showing it to BODS next week. Everyone seems very, very happy with it, and we expect to be putting that into the next bit of work that we do. Once we've got managed removals a little bit underway, we'll start doing this, and this will allow us to have use a lot less CO2 in what we do. So it's just kind of, our data sets will be a lot cleaner, and how much we store. Very, very lastly, what is a bus stop? Just ensuring we're all on the same page. And there is one thing that I want to quickly reach across and grab, because I want to grab this one because it is the better one. Ungroup this here, because I updated what this means. Just bear with me here a moment. Ungroup, because somebody pointed out that I had it wrong for hail and rides. So a bus stop is where the bus stops. A fixed stop, which is custom or marked, is measured as a 1 by 1 metre square centred on where the passenger needs to stand to get the bus. Now, often this co-locates with the flag, or the flag is within that 1 metre by 1 metre. Where there is a difference between those, it should be made on where the person stands, not on where the flag is, if there's a difference. And we put it in as an Eastings Northings, and we translate it in the specific Ordnance Survey way to a lat long. And then every bus stop is represented in the data set in the world with various codes, which includes the indicator, the ATCO code, the NaPTAN code, and then QR codes, which are generally built either from the ATCO code or the NaPTAN code. I couldn't find anyone who's got a separate system or a separate way of doing it, but people tend to switch between these two, as far as I could tell, as to which one they use. So that's caught us up and got everyone on the same page. What did we learn in session 1 on CSVs and visualizations? We learned that CSV files are mostly used to push data into other systems. So everyone who was wanting CSV files, they're wanting CSVs to put it into a system to draw a map, or they're wanting it to put it into a system to do some reporting, although we then discovered that there's not much actual reporting that goes on at the moment on stops and stop movements and things like that. And mapping and being able to visualize things on a map is the major missing thing. Does any of this surprise either of you, that we came out with those 3 earth-shattering conclusions? Hey, Amy. So what I wanted to do was just quickly run through what we got from the last session on mapping, and then start to build on it with yous to kind of see where else we can get, because this is allowing us to really understand and get some ideas for what the next thing should be, and we can then start to do some really good user research and roll around what some of these things are. So what we uncovered was there were three big groups of things that we really liked. Was information on the bus stop. So we had heading, names, and a few things. We had bus routes. We actually found that bus routes, being able to visualize bus routes and bus stops on the one map in a slightly different way. And then there was some interesting things from the bus operators around being able to see depots and crew relief points, because it made a big difference if there was a disruption, if it was a crew relief point or close to a depot and things like that. So we want to have a look at how we could maybe bring those across, not need to put them into NaPTAN, but how we would get hold of those, how people would be able to map them or put that information into the system. Some really interesting things about locality, and some really interesting things about stop areas, and then street manager and the disruption tools were other things that we all thought about. So what I wanted us to do is, if we had a map and we had layers that could be toggled, so these you can turn them on or off, and these are just the suggestions. So being able to see bus stops. Now, I've focused on bus stops. There's also all of the other stops in NaPTAN, but we'll focus on bus stops for the moment. Bus routes, linking to BODS or TNDS to be able to see routes. Localities, using MPTG or something. And stop areas. So being able to see, and you could toggle these on and off as you wanted. Oh, and then Street Manager. So some kind of linking from Street Manager to be able to see those digging up road planned disruptions that might be coming through. So what I wanted us to think about today is, if we showed bus stops, what information would you want to see about a bus stop? And what could we know, learn, or do with this information? So if we put some information on there, what would it allow us to understand more about our bus stops and about our bus stop data, or what would allow us to do with that? And if it was linked to another layer, if it was like bus stops and bus routes, you can easily see the stops that are no longer being served. And I mean, that's a very obvious one, but it's kind of one of those pieces that we just kind of want to tease out and see if that matches with what you're thinking. So I don't go down something that seems completely logical to me might not work for you. And I kind of want to get inside your heads, and I promise to play around very nicely. So why don't I give you like 5 minutes or so just to put up what you think on the mural, what things you think you would like to see about a bus stop. So if you're looking, and you can be zoomed out, or you can be totally zoomed in on the bus stop. So you can zoom down to the highest resolution on Google Maps, which I think is a couple of feet across, so you can see the street width and things like that, or you can be zoomed out and see the entirety of a town. What sort of information would you need about the bus stops? So if I give you 5 minutes, is that going to give you enough time to kind of have a bit of a think and throw some ideas up there?
Yeah.
Does this sound like something? It's me trying to get the information so Hannah and Haraj can look at what we need to do, what we need to look for, and how we need to plan what this could be coming in, and how we can sell this to the right people so that we can bring it in, because therein also lies part of the problem of, we can have great ideas, we need to figure out what the benefits will be so we can sell them into the right people as well. So I'm going to stop sharing for a few minutes, and I'll put on a time.
Sorry,
Yeah?
Can I just stop there? I've never done the mural before. Is it just, I've just opened it up, is that the CSV and visualisation?
Yeah, it should say meeting 2 on it at the top.
Yep, that's the one. Yep. And then do I just press on a post-it note and
So
sticky note?
let me put a couple of post-it notes out for you, Amy. You can see the orange and the teal ones there, and there's a pink one as well, and you can have them as squares or rectangles too.
Does that appear on, because I'm not seeing anything at the moment.
Let me just make sure. Are you? Let me just share the mural link again into the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I'm just on my way.
Thank you.
So, Amy, if you just double check, click on the mural link in the chat.
And then enter as a visitor?
Enter as a visitor.
Yeah.
And I should see you come in.
I can see some now, yeah.
Yeah. I think you might have jumped on the one for the other meeting, which is fine. Right. I've now gotten better at making sure I can very clearly see the difference. And you should see, if you, I will summon everybody. I'm still not seeing you coming in, Amy, because I'm seeing Hannah. I'm seeing
it's coming up as try reconnecting.
Oh.
I tell you what, I'll just jot some things down. If they're any different to what's been put on, I'll mention it.
That sounds perfect.
Thanks,
Thank you,
no
Amy.
problem. Yeah. All right.
Yes, mural is sent to destroyers sometimes. So I'm just going to put a timer on for 5 minutes. I'm going to use the time to quickly run and make myself a second cup of coffee, so my voice may not croak quite so badly. If you get done with bus stops and get your information down. Move down to bus routes and down to some of the other ones if you feel like it. We're really going to focus in on what these layers are and what we could learn from them today. Right, I'll be back in, I've put a timer on it and I'll be back in 5. Oh, and Amy, as you missed the Fred tax, Fred is the new cat that I now share my house with. At some point, I will pay some more Fred tax.
5 minutes later.
And that's me running back when I heard the beep in my ear. Let me just share my screen again. How did we get on? Was there anything? So let me start off. I'm going to ask questions and they might be slightly redundant. So location, is this looking at it? When you say location, are you talking about where it sits on the street or its latitude, longitude location? Or is it that it's in the right place on the street? Just double checking what we mean by location.
It's actual location on the street, I think, really.
Location on the street, cool. So the infrastructure available, e.g. shelter and seating, do we think we would get that from a Google view, or would that be something that your system could also provide?
Yeah, I mean, it's in our system. It's all in there. You know, it's all against the asset. Because we treat every bus stop as an asset, and then it's associated infrastructure with that. So we'd know whether it's got shelter seating, mains power, lighting, etc. Even down to you know, how many panels a timetable carousel might have on it. So there's a lot that you could associate to let customers know, I suppose, before they go there. Are they going to be able to sit down at night? Are they going to feel safe because there's a light? That kind of thing.
Cool. That's really good. That really helps me. So the Google's.
Sorry, can I go back a step then prior to
sure.
me joining? Where are you going to gather all this information up from? Sorry, I came from this angle thinking it was from our NaPTAN.
So what? I'll just take these out. I will run
Apologies,
back slightly. No, it's totally fine. It's good to just make sure that we're all on the same page. So we went through previously on NaPTAN. I won't go through that. What is a bus stop? We're all pretty much on the same page. So I did a version of this on Tuesday. Today is Thursday, so I did it on Tuesday. And from session 1, we learned that the CSV files were mostly used to push data into other systems. That reporting on stops, like the number of new stops and that, people really aren't reporting on that at the moment. And mapping is the main missing thing. So then what we did was in the first session, we went through and we had a look at what we would like from a map, not what we can get currently, with NaPTAN being the center of it, what we would like on a map. So we figured out bus stops, and we've got a whole pile of things about bus stops, bus routes, locality, stop areas, street manager, and disruption layers. So there was kind of these different things, lots of interesting questions that arised around them. So for today, I was kind of building out, going, okay, so if we have a layer called bus stops, diving into that, what is the stuff that you would like to see in the future? And if we can or can't get it from NaPTAN, then it becomes how would we enable somebody to be able to do it? So if we produced a mapping system, how could we enable Rebecca and the South Yorkshire team to take some of the data that they've got and also link that through? Is there something that we could do? So there's a very good mapping service and solution that allows us to layer this information on. I don't know the technical answers. I'm just going to wave my hands at it. But it's more, what are the ideas that we've got that we could do, and not using NaPTAN as the basis of it, but what would we like to layer? For example, the bus routes would come from BODS, but would also include the NaPTAN stop. So it's kind of that really key important piece of information.
So it's not necessarily just the data visualization, it's the information regarding the stops and right.
So that allows us to have that, because the stuff that Rebecca is talking about in terms of infrastructure, that leads into the accessibility questions as well. Because there's lots of questions around accessibility at stops where we need that information that Rebecca's got potentially on another system. How would we bring that in? How would we make that able to be seen? That's all questions that we want to sit down and look at, because we know we've got to bring some of this accessibility information. Is there a seat that I can wait at? Will there be a light? Will it be safe at night time? Is this a kneelable stop? Is there a decent footpath coming to the stop, or is it there's a stop that I keep on? There's two stops that I always talk about. One is called Hockeridge Ridge in Hertfordshire, and it's basically a really lovely concrete platform with a pole and everything, really beautifully done, in the middle of a muddy wood. There is no footpath to or from this place, but it is a very nice accessible bus stop in terms of a ramp could go down to it and everything like that. So it's kind of...
But this isn't necessarily a tool to me. What I was picturing it as is something as a replacement for the ITO service that we had previously.
Some of it would replace, but I want to understand what we could do, because just replacing the ITO World tool, there'd be other stuff that we could do with it now, because we can. I mean, for managed removal, we now get BODS and TNDS data. So is there stuff that we could then do from the BODS and TNDS data that would allow you to have a richer view of the world?
Yeah.
So replace it's more, what did it allow you to do, and how can we do something similar?
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Amy?
Yes, I know that makes sense. So there are some...
Oh, cool. Yeah. Sorry, you missed some of the setup, and also I'm seeing from Di and Rebecca's face, and explaining it again, I've kind of refined the explanation a little bit, which is totally fine. So we've got a Google Street View, so we can see the infrastructure available. We can see from the Spite system. And Di, do you have that from your system? If you've got lights and panels and RTIs and things like that?
The RTIs, yes, but the rest of it's not up to date, and we don't have a process for being kept informed and updating the detail, if you like.
So you're stocked in Teesside.
Yeah, Teesside.
Yeah, I'll just put you in as T's, because otherwise and it was, you were able to get RTI, but not other infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, we have some of it, but, how up to date?
Not up to date.
It just sort of strikes me, though, further on what Amy was saying, that what this is sort of rounded round is what other people, we're improving it for other people rather than necessarily a tool for us.
And that's almost what I want to then look at, as to what is, because we'll go down these layers and have a look at, you're also playing cat tax. What other things that are going to help your world and help your life? So I've focused on bus stops at the top, because they're kind of the core of everything. And then as we move down into some of the other layers, like stop areas and localities, they're much more about improving your world. So if there's stuff here that you're like, putting this in would improve the world for somebody, but not for me, that's really good information for me to know.
Mm-hmm.
Did a proximity to points of interest. So that's kind of about location on the street. Accessibility information, access to the stop. Associated services. What does this one can you help me unpick this one?
I was just thinking in terms of that sort of crossover. I mean, it sort of sits between that and the bus routes, really, doesn't it? Just so.
Yeah, Rebecca, I put exactly the same as you for that one.
Yeah, it's sort of
just more of a hover over to see what services go past that stop.
Yeah.
Rather than actually visualizing where the direction of the stop and what the route actually is, it's more of just knowing what services go past. So if you're checking a stop, it's to say, oh, actually, yes, I'm missing that service off that stop. That means I can delve further into my data to look at it.
Yeah, and also, thinking about how other people would use it, it's also helpful to them to know whether that stop is served or not. So we do get a lot of questions like that.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
And also,
yep.
So from that, I also put, really, is the stop active or inactive? Because for me, there might be bus operators that are using inactive stops, and to kind of see what if the BODS data is going to be put in, it'd be clearly to see if I hovered over that stop, and that's an inactive stop, but why is there a service going past it? It might not be in our data, but it's in BODS data.
Yeah, that would be really yeah. And I don't want to get into stop statuses right now because there's a whole pile of questions around that, but I think I'll just put down and I'll put in there and other statuses.
And the direction indicator as well of the stop.
Cool,
yes.
cool.
Yes.
So is that the bearing?
Yeah.
Yes.
And does that allow you to make sure that it's set up correctly, like you don't have the bearing pointing into the field or something like that?
It's like if there's a crossroads or something, it's which arm is the stop on if all the points are very close to the crossroads, or if there's two parallel roads, the bearing would tell you which road it's actually on.
Right. Because I was also checking it for the bus operators, and their ticketing machines often need to know which direction the bus should be leaving in, because if the bus leaves in a not authorized direction, it's seeing it as being across the street and things like that, especially when there's those circles of overlay around bus stops. Responsible owner of the infrastructure. Oh, that's a really good one. I like that one. So Clear Channel, they're the advertising peeps, right?
Yes. I mean, there are others, but we have Clear Channel up here.
I'll just put or others, or I can't spell others today for some reason, or local authority owned. Link to accessibility information. I started to think about the work of keeping them up to date. Yes, and this is one of the pieces that I want to tease apart when we get to accessibility. But this is really good feeding in about, because I think in some cases you've got a lot of the data, but it's how we ensure that it stays up to date, and also how we push it out in a way that's really clear. So is there anything else that we think we would need on a bus stop, like the name? Sorry. The other groups gave me like 20 minutes on the name, and you haven't mentioned it at all, and I just thought I'd just ask whether it was just people's mindsets or name of stop. That'd be common name, common and short common.
Will this system you're thinking of produce a bit of a report to say whether or not the bus stop is too close to the centre line of the road, or the direction is the wrong way? Or
so here is my problem with those reports as they were produced before. Every single report that was produced ended up with a number of exceptions. So you don't just need to produce a report, you need to produce an exception. Mm-hmm. And every time, and I know from looking through the history, because I delved into the Ito World tool to try and understand what it was doing. There was just, for a number of stops, for example, the stops on Waterloo Bridge that were considered too close to water, every single time something was updated, there was just exceptions every single time of somebody having to accept out this rule. And one of the people from the previous call on this, when we got down to exceptions around localities and stop areas, the bus stop is in England, the place where it serves is in Wales, and you cross a footbridge to get to the place where it serves. And just the list of exceptions, and it's kind of like, so a lot of the rules were coming up with things like that, and also around centre lines and stuff, because if the bus stop is centred on where the passenger stands, the closeness to the centre line is often a mapping error between what you've used to map it and what the system's used to map it. So that's why I wanted to be clear about how we are mapping stops and how we're doing the translation, so that when we build this, we're using the right tools and a tool that will map things where you've mapped them, because I know that running from Street Map, Open Mapper, Ordnance Survey, Google Maps and Apple Maps, the stops move a number of meters, and when we're down to putting stops down to a meter squared, those number of meters make differences, and that's quite an important thing. So we want to sit down and make sure that whatever we're mapping maps them to the right place, and then you can see, hey, this bus stop, I've said that it's here, and it's the road's moved or something, and I need to move them, a couple of meters this way or a couple of meters that way, because you often end up with curves being taken out of roads, or roads being moved just a little bit because of construction. So just allowing for those, because I trust yous. Yous know your bus stops. I think any rules that I put in would drive yous mad, because the business, the logic that you can build into bus stops doesn't take into account the local reality. And this is something that we're going to get into when we get around naming conventions as well, of what is the local name of a stop. And I will use the example I always use of Old Kent Road Tesco's is also known as Dunstan Road. Now, it's technically Dunstan Road because that's the intersection and it's on the right side of the intersection, and that's all the rules. You say Dunstan Road to anybody trying to get to that stop and they will go, okay, sorry, don't know what the stop is. You say Old Kent Road Tesco's and it's like, totally know the stop. That's the stop that I want. And it's, I think TfL have it named now as Old Kent Road Tesco's, but they did a flip between it at various points because I think they were trying to meet the business rules and meet the schema. And it's like, no, the local name is the local name. And I know that there's some that people always talk about, which is the pubs and things like that. When I grew up, in the town that I grew up, there was a large discount supermarket. And it was referred to by everybody who was at least 15 to 20 years older than me as Goobays. It was called Three Guys. It had been called Three Guys for all of my life, but everybody who was older than me would refer to it as Goobays. Everybody learned that Goobays and Three Guys were the same place. It was just the previous name of the supermarket. So it's now defunct and has now gone. It went out of business in the mid-90s and became something else. I believe that there are people like my mum who would still refer to it as Goobays, even though it's now a totally different shop. And it is that thing of there is custom names that people have, and how do we play around with what is the name that everyone in the village will know and the name that fits the national schema are probably going to be two completely different things. And how do we allow for that so that people doing the announcements on the buses, people looking on a map to try to find the stop can actually find the stop that they're after? I don't know the answer to this, and this is where the business rules, I think, fall down a little bit. Does that make sense, Amy, as to how I'm seeing it? And I have also found somewhere, and I'll hunt it down again, the 136 business rules that I did manage to find across all the different systems that NaPTAN, that we're trying to put rules into NaPTAN. and you can get a sense of how clashing they all were, because some of them allowed a bus stop within 500, reported if the bus stop was within 50 metres of water, and another one was within 100 metres of water, or there was overlapping and inconclusive rules. Does that make sense?
No, that does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just that we did find some of the tools that were reported quite handy. More so because our NaPTAN data hadn't been touched for so long, that it drew attention to certain issues that we didn't realise existed in the NaPTAN data.
Yeah, and that's some of what. So my future plans, the backlog that sits behind me that I constantly refer to by waving my arm like this. One of the things in there is data quality, because it's what everyone talks about with NaPTAN. I can't tackle that until we can get the old stops out, because the 30 or so percent, depends on who you talk to, and which local authority you're talking about, but that those dead stops that no longer exist, sometimes they're stuck in the middle of the North Sea, sometimes they've got removed. If we can get them out, we can then start to look at, okay, looking at your active stops only, here's your completeness, here's your consistency for this field, and how can we help you make this field more complete, more consistent, and more accurate, and how can we build that up across the entirety of the system. And that's a hard job, because which field do you start with? It's definitely not indicator, because the 12,000 plus versions of indicator are way too many. Anyway, that rant over, moving along, moving down to bus routes. So what I'm thinking is that you can toggle seeing the bus routes on and off. So you could easily see which stops are not served by a bus route, but also which stops are served by multiple bus routes and multiple routes. So until BODS is 100% accurate, this will only be advertising the inaccuracies to downstream users. So well, this is part of NaPTAN. It would be a tool that is aimed at the NaPTAN data providers and direct data users, not the very downstream end public users. So I wouldn't imagine a member of the public trying to use this for planning a journey or anything like that. This is much more for you to have as a tool so that you can improve your data and improve your understanding of how your bus routes are being, your bus stops are being served.
So would that go directly to BODS and then TNDS if there's no data from BODS, or would it show both and there's a button between the two that you can toggle on and off so you can see your own data and you can see BODS data?
Don't know. That's a really good idea. Thank you, Amy. Brilliant idea of being able to toggle between them.
Yeah, it'd be interesting that, because you would then be able to see any differences.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great small thing. And it might be that's one of the first. It's things like this that I can then give to Hannah to go away and go, okay, which one of these small features is going to be the best one to start with? You know, what's something that's going to deliver some bang to you? Needs to follow roads rather than straight lines. Yeah, totally. Is this because a lot of the mapping of the bus routes currently just draws straight lines between the stops?
I think it depends on what system you've got. Mine does follow the road, but I think there are certainly others that don't.
And it'll be the amount of detail that's within the trans exchange as well. So if it's coming from a SIF data set, you're not going to have the road details. It's just from A to B. Whereas the trans exchange will actually tell you a bit more detail for a mapping system to be able to use downstream.
Then that gives us some really good pieces that we will need to sit down and pull out so that we can actually map this, and we can feed to some of those what would be data providers to this, of like, we can help you make your data better if you make these sort of changes to your data. So then the people who are doing the bus stops can do the bus stops, and then the bus routes become better, and we end up with a nice virtuous circle.
I know for the Northeast at the moment, we still send SIF data rather than TransExchange. So I think that would be really hard for a mapping tool to do, unless they've obviously got the automatic detection of the roads. But then it could take them down the wrong road if there's not a bus stop between two.
Yeah. This is all fun stuff that we can get to as we start to implement this. We can look at which ones we can implement easiest, and then we can start to bring them across. If you were, so here's a question, because it is one of the ideas that I had the other day. If you can have your bus routes, your bus stops, and you can see the bus stops that aren't served, whether they're active or inactive, is that useful information for you currently? Or is that kind of like, it's interesting, but it's not useful?
I think it's
Rebecca.
very useful, and I think as well, if it's even possible to show when it was last served. And when we have sort of like a bit of a 6-month rule where our infrastructure team will check when a stop's been inactive for 6 months, and then they'll check if it's got any chance of being served in the future. So being able to have something that they can look at instead of asking lots of questions to different teams, that would be very useful.
And what would you? And so the infrastructure team would use that to decide, should they take the bus stop out?
Yeah, they'll be able to see. So it's basically our sort of redundant stop sort of process. So it has to be redundant for at least 6 months, and double check as well to make sure there's no plans for a service to come down that road, because we've been bitten by that one before, and it's not great. When it's front page of the paper, is it? It sort of tends to bite you. It'd be a really good thing to reference, to see, that it can be something where you can run some kind of report straight from it to show anything that's not been served in the last 6 months. And an easy thing to pass on to find out if there's any chance of something being served in the future, and a lot easier for them to actually decide what to do. Because obviously it costs to take them out as well as putting them in. So
they cost to put in, they cost to maintain, and they cost to destroy.
Exactly.
And would that be the same for you, Diane, Amy, and that kind of things that you could think about there?
I already have in my software the ability to find out stops that are unused. I can do a report. We don't take out bus stops that are currently unused or even long-term unused. The only way they come out is if there's a sort of road safety reason, or an estate's been built on top of it or whatever. Everything else stays on, just because it's a lot easier to reawaken a bus stop than to put a new one in and deal with all the planning and the neighbours and the rest of it. So we don't do that. So yeah, I can see it would be handy for people that don't have that ability, but I already have that ability, so it's not something I would use.
And I'm just gonna translate, Di. If I say planning is a pain, getting planning permission is a pain.
Yeah, nobody wants to bus up outside their house, do they?
No. But if they bought the house and there was one already there, then that's their lookout.
Yeah.
Why don't people want bus stops outside their houses? Now, I asked that in all the pretense of naivety, in that I did turn down a flat that was outside a 24-hour bus stop with a single pane, without double glazing. So I'm aware of why you might not, but I just kind of want to. That's an urban person's view of it. What is the less urban person's view of the problem of having a bus stop?
I think it's the potential of people stood outside your front
Yeah.
window or sitting on your windowsill while they wait for the bus, rather than the stopping and starting of the bus as it stops to pick people up. It's more the
And if that bus stop
interaction
has
with
got
people.
a shelter on it, you might not necessarily even get bus users in that shelter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ah,
We do get a lot of requests to move things because there's kids and stuff hanging around in the shelters.
Yeah.
and things, so.
that aren't for bus users. I'll just put that down. I kind of
Just
understand.
to kind of discourage antisocial behaviour, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Antisocial behaviour. Is this because you've got closed-in bus stops? I'm thinking of London bus stops, which are like open on 3 sides and things like that. I'm assuming, or for 2 sides. I'm assuming some of your bus shelters are much more enclosed.
It doesn't
Generally on
matter how
3
enclosed
sides,
it is.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
as long as it's got like a roof on it, sheltering from the
Yeah.
rain, you'll generally
Yeah.
find in some places it is just where the local youth gather.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's local use. Okay, cool. Brilliant.
Now, one tool I really found helpful with the ITO was whether or not bus went in the opposite direction, or I can't remember what it was called now. Or it missed stops out. It was a good way of us actually checking things with our data.
So
now, what was that tool? What was it called? Can anybody remember?
So bus routes that miss stops.
And it did a loop, didn't it, in the visualization to show whether or not it was the wrong way around. Can you not remember? No, I used to use that an awful lot.
I can't remember what I had for breakfast, Amy.
I'll put that one down. I've just put it in with the hover to see what bus routes, and we can play around with some of those ideas.
I'm missing that because I moved away from transport and came back again, and since that ITO's obviously gone, and our system that we're using now doesn't show anything like that, so there's no real sight of like on my services missing stops, or on my services kind of going to the wrong stop and doing a loop where it shouldn't do. I did find that very helpful.
Yeah, and I think in trying to get that right information, I think this is about mapping the bus routes to the bus stops, and allowing people to view them and visualize them in different ways. And that's kind of a really nice, interesting piece there. If you're okay, I would like to move on to locality and stop areas, and I'm going to give you another 5 minutes or so to put your thoughts up, and Amy to note your thoughts down on a piece of paper. Would that just to kind of think about if you then had the ability to toggle on a layer of your localities or toggle on a layer of your stop areas, what would that allow you to do, and what sort of things would that build on? And would you use those, would you layer everything up, or would you want it only bus stops and stop areas, or only bus stops and localities, or routes and localities? Like, which of these do you think you would match up? Does that make sense? Rebecca looks like they've got a question.
Yeah, potentially stupid. Difference between a locality and a stop area.
No, that's a brilliant question, because if you the data aren't feeling totally confident on this, I think that's a brilliant question. And I am going to ask, with no poa for going to the schema, Di and Amy to give their thoughts. We'll go to Di first and then Amy.
Right. The locality is the National Gazetteer. So that was your areas. If you had a bus stop and it was in a town, then the locality of that town is the name. So in my area, Gisborough, but there's lots of stops in Gisborough. The stop area was a pair of stops on either side of a road, so one in each direction. We interpreted it, and I'm going to say we interpreted it because, again, I don't know, can't remember that far back, but your stop area, a bus couldn't stop twice in the same stop area because those stops were linked, and it wouldn't if they're on opposite sides of the road. But if you were around a junction, say, it couldn't stop on the approach to the junction and then after the junction.
So it's like in a city centre where you've got allocated stops because you've got an area with stops, a particular road in the centre, and you've got those proper stop references, and they only stop at a certain one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a
but the
cluster
locality is bigger than that, and they're all in the locality anyway.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up an exception to what Di just talked about, because in London, one of the buses that I catch stops on the approach to a junction and then on the leaving the junction. So it comes in up London Road and it's got a stop on London Road. It then turns left on London Road into Newington Causeway and has a stop on Newington Causeway.
Yeah. Is it the same stop area though?
I don't know, because I haven't gone through and had a look, but they are literally, I mean, London bus stops are incredibly close to each other, and these are two very, very close ones, even for London. But
you're allowed to do that, but they should be separate stop areas.
And that's really interesting as well. So I will go and this is part of the rules. Amy, would you like, Di's given their interpretation, Rebecca's agreed with it. What's yours? Is it any different to this?
No, that's how we would have calculated it as well. We do it on clusters of stops.
Yeah. Yeah, so your stop area can be 2 stops or 6 stops.
Or it could be a bus station or an interchange, whatever.
Yeah.
Cool. So I will leave you for 5 minutes to go through and look at this and put your thoughts up in terms of if you could view these on your map and see the stop areas and your gazetteer
the stop
information.
areas are mainly more like the stop names that you would put on the level above, wouldn't you?
Interesting thought there, Amy. And so have a think on how your system does stop areas, how your old system did stop areas, how your new system does stop areas, and how you think about stop areas. Because I also want to understand how they're used by the downstream consumers, because that was quite an interesting thing, understanding from the bus operators how they were seeing stop areas as well. So I'm curious to get yours views on this. So if I give you 5 minutes, actually what I'll do is I'll give us 10. Feel free to take a 5-minute break, because we've been going for an hour. We could all do with a stretch and that kind of stuff. This is the stuff my doctors are telling me I'm not supposed to sit for 8 to 10 hours at a time. I'm supposed to take breaks and stand up. So I will make the timer for 10 minutes. We'll come back in 10 minutes. Put in your locality and your stop areas and how they work, and take a bit of a stretchy break as well. And I'll see you in 10.
5 minutes later.
Hello, how are we going? Has everyone had a chance to have a quick break as well?
Yeah, we did. Thanks, Joe.
No worries at all. I will not add any extra time. Excellent. I'm going to, when the beep finally goes, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through these and then just kind of poke and prod and see what other things we would want to see from a gazetteer. I learned a lot last time on how travel line uses localities. I'm not sure of other travel planners. And I can give an example of trying to get to see Di and how I got very confused. Cool. Localities could do with an overhaul. Yes, they were originally designed to be fairly generic. Possibly a final level of detail would be more useful. Bus stops need to be shown whichever level of mapping locality stop area is used. Otherwise, there's no point of reference for locality stop area. Yes, totally. I'm always seeing that the bus stops is kind of the core data, and then these are layers of information over the top. When it comes to localities, as far as I understand them being used, so for example, going to see Di in Stockton, if I typed in Stockton-on-Tees, it would try to take me to a place that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, which was the Stockton-on-Tees locality. But if I was smart enough to go Stockton train station, it would actually take me to the place where I was actually intending on going. That did actually cause me some issues with some of the travel planners and some of the booking systems, trying to get it to see the right Stockton and trying to see the right Stockton-on-Tees, because Stockton-on-Tees is the name of the place but not the train station. If only I'd known that when I first started doing it, and then realised that there was a train station called Stockton. Thank you, Di. But so questions for you. Localities have a kind of mapping around them of some kind of space. We've done some kind of mapping of a locality. I'm not 100% sure how we did that. And then there is a central point of the locality. Do you get to set that centre point of the locality, or is that set as the geographical centre?
You can set that.
Rebecca looks slightly shocked that you could do that, and I'm just going to say, Rebecca, was that your understanding of localities as well?
I don't use it. It's not something that I actually get involved in, so I don't know.
And as far as I understand, localities were so that so to give another example, and I'm sorry that I always have to use where I live, but it's the place I've been able to pull things apart. I live in what is called Elephant and Castle, but it is not called Elephant and Castle. My electoral roll is South Borough and Bermondsey. My ward is Chaucer Ward. My council is Southwark. Everything that you layer up here, not one of them says Elephant and Castle. Elephant and Castle is, in fact, doesn't exist in any of the official ways to describe this area, and yet it is a description of where I live. Is that what? So, as far as I understand, the rationale behind having MPTG was that we could do those local names of this place, which has a number of different names, none of which use the words Elephant and Castle, is known locally as Elephant and Castle, so that this allows people to map a route to where they actually wish to go. Was that the intended, and I'm looking at Di and Amy because I know that you were around there, but was that the intended of locality?
I don't know that Elephant and Castle would be generic enough to exist as a locality. I mean, London's different anyway, but
yeah.
It was very much wider. So, okay, Stockton-on-Tees is the borough of Stockton-on-Tees. It's also the town. So that was the parent of all the little places within it. So you've got large estates, Hardwick and Ingleby and, Beresfield. So they all exist as a locality underneath the umbrella of Stockton-on-Tees. And what you were saying about your geographic centre of Stockton-on-Tees being nowhere near the town of Stockton-on-Tees, because that's the geographic centre of the borough of Stockton, which is like the centre, the average centre of all of the places within it.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Elephant and Castle would actually exist or should exist as a locality in its own right, because it's quite a concise little area, I would imagine. And it might well be your South Bermondsey or whatever. We weren't the instructions at the time when we set this up, you weren't allowed to be too niche, shall we say, which is why I think it does need an overhaul to make it more niche.
It definitely does, because at the moment we're looking at our real-time signs and how do we find via points on real-time for a system to easily find something to just generically do a via. And we have, so for example, if you're in Durham city centre, the locality might be Durham.
Yeah.
So our park and ride is actually at Belmont, but the locality is Durham.
Yes.
It does need it worked at the time, but now there's more, like, computer systems are used a lot more now than what they were, and obviously the likes of the real time never existed then. Things weren't needed, whereas I feel now we need kind of that extra level to drill down to.
Down to local. So I was just about to have a moment of knowing the amount of housing estates that exist within what people would colloquially call Elephant and Castle, which is kind of we've probably got about the same population as some of the small towns often. But it's also because it's people within like 5 to 7 minutes walking of one of the two Elephant and Castle stations consider the area to be Elephant and Castle. So it is kind of one of those mental map things that is really, I think it's actually really fascinating to think about how people think about where they live and how they talk about it.
Yeah, but it was a case of, I think, if you were talking to somebody and they said, where are you from? You'd perhaps initially say, I'm from London, or I live in London.
Yeah.
But if you're in London, you might say Elephant and Castle, but somebody else might say, south of the river or Southwark or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was trying to pinpoint it without being number 10, the high street.
Yeah. And this gets into, because I think I tried to tackle understanding this by saying which high street, but I think that doesn't even answer the question sufficiently, because there are hundreds of high streets and hundreds of London road stops, and it's by using locality we understand which of them it is. So it's high street in Stockton, and it's high street in Durham, and it's high street in York. I'm assuming York has a high street. And because the stop would always be high street, it's like, how do you combine it into something that people can understand which high street they're going to? But that also doesn't quite answer this, because there isn't a high street in Elephant and Castle for historic reasons. But there is it is a transport hub. So and the Walworth Road, which is the next piece that always seems to be called Elephant Castle, is the high street, but it's called Walworth Road because London be different. And it's kind of one of those really fascinating, how do people refer to places? And I think that's going to be a fascinating thing to pull apart. London-centric and non-London-centric, urban, and I think it changes urban and not quite so urban. I'm not going to call you rural because you're not, but you're not quite so urban, because I think it does change how you talk about the place that you come from, the place you're going to, and describe somewhere, perhaps.
That's more your primary and secondary location within locality, and whereas your locality site kind of sits above that, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So you got your primary and secondary location.
So, for example, we would have locality of Durham, but we would have Belmont Park and Ride.
Park and Ride, yeah.
So we're now looking at changing because of the real time, because we don't want it to say Durham as the final destination on the signs, or because because you're using locality for the buyer points or whatever, we're then looking at amending our localities to be smaller. And so we would have a Belmont locality.
That sounds really, really interesting. Because I'm also understanding from the lovely, was it Sue, who we talked to, who
Yeah.
Oh, Sue,
yeah. Sue, yeah. Because she was I understood from the conversation that she was a member of the council, of the district council as well, or of the district ward. And I think that also makes it interesting to understand the councils and wards, and maybe have those layers which come from an almost electoral or local system, just as something to visualize, not as something to refer to, but as something maybe as another visualization layer of mapping your localities and your wards a little bit, perhaps.
I mean, we've had to sort of look at this because one of the actual local council wards wanted to actually fund some real-time displays, and the only way we were able to sort of look at the ward properly in relation to bus stops was using Google. But then it's then, you know, we're then asking to double check to see, you know, and it refers back to the earlier section, we're having to double check then to see which stops actually did have a shelter and mains power. So then, you know, so you're having to check lots of different things to just try and find out a simple fact, where can we put one. So adding these things in, it'd be a lot easier.
Yeah, well, for Durham County Council, we have our own in-house like intramap for anybody to view online, any council employee, which is basically a mapping system. You can toggle on and off the districts, the wards. You can put on bus stop. There's a bus stop layer. There's a school layer on that. We've got a real-time layer, so it shows where the real-time signs are. Infrastructure, because obviously infrastructure aren't within our section, they're downstairs. They've got their own layer, but I can use that by just toggling it on and off. It's quite handy, actually.
So Amy, some of the stuff that we were talking about, you might not need.
No, I wouldn't, because I would use that in-house.
Because you'd use the in-house, but some other councils, I'm looking at Rebecca, might need, because you don't have that in-house. So one of the things I'm looking at is not to replace what Amy's got, but to kind of provide something that does as much as we can with the public information to give a slightly raising the playing field a little bit for people. So somebody like Rebecca can see their wards, their localities, their bus stops in that overlay. They might not be able to see her infrastructure, because we'd need a separate pool to pull that in, but it would just be that interesting mix of layering. Amy?
I mean, our schools, for school transport, the schools transport section use it frequently, because they like to see where the buses are running and which service to get to the schools, etc. It's
would you be able to do me a massive solid favor and give me a couple of screen grabs of that, not of any PPI information or anything like that, but of like maybe the school and school routes information and the district wards or something like that, so that I can
it's just a toggle on, toggle off.
But it's just understanding the level of detail, because it's
just a basic mapping system. I mean, I could even present it.
Oh, that would be so cool. It just gives us a chance to kind of see what else is done, and then have a look at, okay, what could we, when we do this, can we meet that as a minimum, and then what else can we layer on?
It's a very basic system, basic. Just give me a call sometime and I'll do a demo of it.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So have we covered enough on localities? Let me run back and have a quick run through locality. So we had it what somebody in the street would say where they lived, worked, which I actually thought was a really great description of a locality. The shape is set by stops within the locality. So you don't set the shape, you set the shape by putting the stops in, which I think is quite an interesting, weird way of doing it. And I'm going to sit down and do that.
There used to be a tool on Ito as well that used to be able to visualize whether or not you had a stop and your localities overlapped.
Yes,
And that's
they
exactly,
shouldn't overlap.
Because they should
Yeah.
never overlap. Yeah, I was going to say they should never overlap, or you'd allocated a stop. Which actually, if you did have an overlap, you would then question why is there an overlap, and maybe create a new locality or
Change it.
change it. Yeah.
Let me just, so localities.
Sorry, I keep on referring back to Ito, but I did use it quite a bit for NaPTAN related things.
Yeah, and we know, so it couldn't continue. It was too insecure. It was too old. There was too much. There was stuff on there that couldn't be maintained. So that was, and we know that when we took it down, we didn't have all of the answers. So this is part of what I'm doing, is just figuring out. I know you've been without it for some time, and it's like, okay, what's the core stuff that we can provide? What's the next layer? What's the next layer? And how can we give you the same usefulness, even if it's done in a slightly different way?
Yeah. I know for data quality wise, I don't think data quality from a local authority will be as good now there isn't an Ito tool to check against.
And that's one of the challenges that I'm now working on to go through as people come into the managed removal, is then looking at how we measure data quality and what that actually is, because we've found there are 147. We found that there were so many different ways of doing an ATCO code. There are so many different ways of building a NaPTAN code. There are so many different ways of putting in this information that met all of the rules, but didn't come up with any consistency. So there's a lot of kind of uncovering what's the bestest way of doing something, and what's a good way of doing something.
You sort of adapt the rules to what fits locally for the systems that you've got as well.
If a rule needs to be adapted, does it still remain a rule?
No.
Because no. And therefore this is the conundrum that I'm playing with, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding incredibly challenging, and I'm not. I'm just I do understand that the rules provided some really good tooling, and that's some of what I'm trying to slowly tease out in different ways.
It's just we're finding from going out for a software company, they would import NaPTAN, and NaPTAN's almost the Bible of what they use for our names for roadside information, etc. We can then amend those names if we want to work for the public. But I'd rather amend it in NaPTAN first, so then we've got kind of everything fits. So our roadside information is exactly the same as our real time, etc. But we came to the point where, because of NaPTAN rules, you couldn't do that. So we had slightly different names.
And that's also something, and you've brought up one of the things that I know that I'm going to be looking at between September, or probably before September onwards. We're going to come out and talk about those names and the rework that's done around names, the voiceovers, the real-time information, the next stop. We know that there's a lot of rework there, and we want to understand not why people are doing it because you want to reflect language, but really diving into that and getting to grips with it, because it's one of the things that I want to find ways of stopping us having to do a lot of rework. Because that's a lot of waste in the system, and you don't got the time to waste. Nobody got the time to waste. So how do we play that through? So that's one of the focuses that I've got coming up. What I'd like to just pull us back on is just staying on localities again. So localities don't overlap. So being able to map and see if you've put a bus stop down here, and it should be in the locality on this side, but you've put in the locality on this side, and you've now got overlapping localities, you can move it around and things like that. I think that's a really, really good piece that we would need to show. Is there anything else on localities before we kind of drop down to stop areas? And then I've got one more thing that I want to bring in. Rebecca?
I suppose more of a question than anything.
Sure.
One of the things we have a problem with is that where the locality changes to another one, where it's divided down a main road, and you always get the customers saying, I don't think that's in that area, that's this area. Normally it's because it's the side of the road that they live on, and they want to be known more in the posher area. And we have the same thing constantly, and it's just, has anybody actually come across a way of actually working that out? Because you normally do use sort of main roads or something to divide an area up, or something that's easier to sort of, say this is this area, this is this area.
Local knowledge, that's the only thing. And you'll not please everybody, and other places it's just not obvious at all.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because this is such a universal problem. It even happens in the town in the place where I grew up, of whether you were South Side Papakura or Papakura. It made a difference to your house price. It made a difference to how you advertised. It made a difference to what schools you were likely to go to. Added also, I mean, I always say come from Papakura. I actually come from South Side Papakura. But then if you were on Red Hill, you were in a slightly better part of town. And where was that boundary? Was it at the bottom of the hill, or did it start at this intersection or that intersection? And was this bit included or was that bit included? Yeah. It's a constant battle. But I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Rebecca. I think the next one is around stop areas. Now, one of the ones that I also know that stop areas, localities, and local authorities can be a complex overlay because, and I know I'm probably going to get this wrong, I believe, or I've been told, or I've heard via rumours, that the road to Blackpool Airport is on a boundary between two local authorities, and the stops on one side of the road belong to one local authority, and the stops on the other side belong to the other, and they are therefore in different localities and in different, but they're joined by a stop area, so that the planning systems know that if you catch a bus on this side, you can then cross the road and catch the bus going, and you could catch the road back from that side. Is this, I know it's not common, but I know that boundaries are also quite porous when it comes to NaPTAN. And
it's very common, I think you'll find.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Di. Because I also know of another one, which is Denham, which is a town that is on the edge of, it's a town on the edge of London that contains Durham, and it is far enough away from London that it is not part of London in any way, shape, or form. It's outside the M25. However, it has bus stops that are run by TfL because it's right on the edge of the very edge of the TfL bus stops. And those stop at TfL bus shelters and bus stops that are just down the road or next to the Denham-owned, which I think is Buckinghamshire, the Denham-owned bus stops and bus shelters. And does that blending, is that just a London problem, or does that blending of you can have bus shelters and bus stops owned by two local authorities, like physically next to each other on the road?
Particularly for smaller unitary authorities like I've got, when I've got a roundabout where three of the stops are in one authority and one of the stops is in another authority. I've also got a level crossing railway. The railway forms the boundary between the authorities, and I've got a bus stop that are in the same pair, but they're either side, they're in separate authorities. It certainly happens, I would have said most places, but more specifically where they're smaller unitary authorities because the boundaries are closer.
Rebecca, do you face this problem, or do you just own all of South Yorkshire and go, it's mine?
That's it. We cover the whole of South Yorkshire. So even though we're made up of 4 districts, as you know, South Yorkshire, we basically look after the lot. We do all the transport side of things, and then you generally find that even crossing boundaries into different counties, it's not a problem. There's sort of enough greenery around to sort of split you from this sort of the edge of something and then the next bus stop. So, you know, you tend to find they get to further apart as the further you go out, and it's not really an issue.
Yeah, you got a natural break.
Yeah.
Rebecca, just remind me, all of your South Yorkshires are under the one ATCO code, or are you running 4 ATCO codes?
No, just the one. We've got 370, but the end 5 digits, they start with a different number. So we've got like 2, 3, 4, and 5 for the different areas. But they all start with 370.
Yeah, no, I'm just asking because that's another complication that's landed on my lap, is making ATCO codes and splitting how to split ATCO codes and how to join ATCO codes together. Yeah, of course, because no one's done it for 25 years, and it's my problem for this week. It's not my problem for this week, but it's my problem. It's a slightly earlier problem. So thinking stop areas, we've got clusters or pairs of bus stops. They can only stop once in this, which might have already been dictated by the journey planner originally. Not every LA uses stop areas. As far as I'm aware, everyone does, but I'm curious, is that from local knowledge, or is that from just historic knowledge there, Di?
Historic knowledge. So I've got 5 authorities. I originally had 4 authorities. When I took the 5th one on, they didn't have stop areas, and I had to put them in.
Okay. 5th, 4th, Di took.
How did they deal with it before then, Di?
Just individual stops. I don't believe that everybody uses stop areas, but I couldn't give you an example to.
I think that's a nice little. I think that's going to be an interesting data dive for me to go through and pull some stuff out of the data set and really understand that. Not sure about stop areas being shown separately. We use city town centres and large local area centres, but it seems more like an additional layer to locality. Okay, so if you had locality and then you put stop areas on top, so we would want it so your stop areas sat on top of your locality, and then you could see the stop areas within that locality and see like the town centre, 5 or 6 stops that were outside of where we met, Di. There was like a row of stops, and I'm assuming that row of stops outside that interesting bike shop community centre, they were all within the same stop area.
Yes. So they were Stockton High Street North. So Stockton High Street extends obviously beyond what you saw it, but because the buses stop twice in the High Street, the stop area's got to have 2 stop areas. So we've got north and south.
That's fascinating, and that's really good. So I'll just make a note: Stockton High Street North and south. Okay. Being aware that we've got about 15 minutes left, and this has been brilliant. Thank you so much. There's one last layer that I'd like to just kind of ponder on. There's this doodad, I'm just going to call it a doodad, called Street Manager, that is used by some people to manage digging up the street and planning the longer disruptions of like BT needs to come and dig up the street, and then the gas people are coming through, and then the water people are coming through, and one of the goals of it is to surface this information so maybe people do it all at once and don't dig up the street and repave it 4 times. They dig it up the once, do all the work and put it back together. Would being able to see these longer disruptions, these planned disruptions, as a mapping layer be useful to you?
It's a mapping layer to turn on and off, yes, because that kind of information doesn't necessarily get fed down to us.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's normally seen together, is it?
No.
Because, I mean, we were part of the TFN disruptions tool, and which has now gone down to the DFT. And it's sort of in isolation, really. I mean, obviously you can take a feed and you can actually put it together with other information, but generally you don't. It's all sort of fragmented. So to be able to see things when you're looking at I don't know, any sort of development or bus stop movements or anything at all, to be able to see the disruptions at the same time, I think would be really, really useful. I mean, we've had issues lately with Doncaster Council. They're doing a lot of changes in the centre of Doncaster, and at the same time, we're trying to put in the new shelters and get real-time screens in and things, and getting all that actually, you think you can do it, and then it turns out the road's not open yet, and it gets very messy. But being able to see that in one place would be great.
And you are part of that disruptions tool. Yeah,
so we use the disruptions tool as it currently stands. We feed data into that, and obviously it's being retendered, isn't it? I believe to be part of BODS.
I believe so.
But yeah, we've been using that, and we consume currently that data back to show on our website. So yeah, it's just basically being able to see it in one place, really.
Yeah. So in the digging up, because you were talking about a couple of things there, in the digging up the street stuff, do you get told about that, or do you just find out when you go to street, you discover street dug up?
Yeah, we've got a separate team or services that deal with the disruptions, and they get the information and deal with completing the disruptions tool, and also talking to the operators about what their diversions may be. So they get to know about these things. So I suppose because we're a big organisation, there's different teams doing different things, and that you don't always see it all joined up. So yeah, being able to see that joined up will make a big difference.
I think as much as possible. If it might not be relevant for certain people, but the different teams it would be, if it's open to anybody. Just like the bus stop layer and the bus services would be handy for infrastructure.
And it means there's less emails flying around, isn't
Yeah,
there? There's less
exactly.
questions, because you can self-serve to see
refer to
what's
this
going
website.
on.
Yeah.
Di, how would it work in your world? Would this be a good thing? Would this be a useful thing?
Well, potentially. I'm just sort of curious as to, sometimes you'll get an RTO that is valid for 3 months, but actually the work's going to take 2 days. So if you've got something being flagged that these bus stops are involved for this RTO, and actually they're not, and it's actually going to be minimal disruption when it does happen. So pinch of salt, I think, is as far as I'm. And of course, you've also got the standard. Oh, we've dug up the road today, and there's a bus stop involved. You didn't tell us.
I think it was one of the interesting things that we spoke to the street manager team on, because I don't think they were taking in the NaPTAN data. So it's kind of one of the layers that might be provided to them, and it might be interesting to do the reverse here. So whatever is the NaPTAN mapping solution and how public it is, the one thing that I want to be certain is whatever we present, it doesn't look like a consumer driven thing. This isn't for person trying to plan a journey. This is for people like yourselves. So that's an interesting piece of messaging that we might have to do. We've got about 10 minutes left. Is there anything that we should have talked about that I haven't dug into? Oh, I'm taking silence as I've done really well at kind of pulling apart mapping and things like that. And I know a lot of this really has been like vague, and we could do this and we could do that. What I'm really trying to get is a lot of these different ideas, because then we can take them and start going, okay, here's how the users are seeing this, here's what they're talking about would be really useful. And this allows me to think about and consider, when I build something, what's going to work based on these conversations, what might fit this and what wouldn't fit this. And it allows me to kind of tease out a little bit as to what should be there. And then I can bring something back and go, does this look kind of like what we were talking about? And you can say, oh no, you've missed it by a country mile. You've missed it by the distance between 2 country bus stops. This is not London bus stop distances. You've gone completely wild here. And we can then refine it down, because for me, knowing what it isn't is as good as knowing what it is. So knowing no is as good as knowing yes. If I've presented something and yous have gone, no, it's got to look like this, that's great for me, because it goes, okay, all of this stuff, probably not, let's have a look over here. And it just allows a little bit more kind of moving around. So I'm just going to close it down there. I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording. There's a little feedback corner. I'd really, really appreciate your feedback. I know this was a very small session, and it's been interesting to have 2 very small sessions on this. Just to give you a heads up, the next 2 sessions, because I do an afternoon and a morning one now, just to allow people who have slightly different schedules to come along. We're going to be talking about Flex, Hail and Ride, and DRT. And this isn't to critique what you're doing. This is because I'm the same as with ATCO codes. I'm aware everyone's doing them slightly differently, and I want to understand the differences, because I can see the differences in the data, and I want to understand how you're thinking about them and putting them into your system, so that when people start talking about, we want to do the flexible and the hail and ride and those demand responsive transport schedules within BODs, we can do the right kind of stuff. I understand what kind of stops you're putting in, and I can help BODs understand how they should interpret some of the data a little bit there. And also, hopefully, we can coalesce slightly in the same way as we have around what is a bus stop. We can coalesce slightly around what is a hail and ride and what is a flex, and how we as a group describe them. This isn't saying go back and change your data, but this is saying this is kind of how we're going to think about them in the future, and how we're going to talk about them. Does that make sense to everyone? I see Rebecca nodding, so thank you for that. So. Stop sharing, stop record. I will say thank you before I stop record. Thank you everyone for your input today. It's been brilliant. I was